Good evening and welcome to the August 27, 2024 meeting of the Abington Board of School Directors. I note the attendance of all board members with the exception of Ms. Eisenhart, who is excused. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The Abington Board of School Directors has convened this evening's meeting at the Administration Building, and the public is welcome. In consideration of the health and safety of the school community, this meeting is also being broadcast live on the Abington School District YouTube channel. This meeting is being recorded and will be accessible on the district's website and cable channel no later than Friday, August 30th, 2024, to allow those members of the public who cannot participate to view the proceeding at a later time. Comments from citizens will be conducted in person and by phone. Information regarding participating remotely in public comment will be displayed on the screen at the time of public comment, and the board thanks the public in advance for its cooperation. An executive session was held immediately preceding this evening's public meeting regarding litigation. This is a place where we hold dignity and respect in high regard. Both your presence and your voice are welcome in this space. Dr. Fetcher, any additional announcements for this evening?
Yes, Mrs. Brown, I have one announcement this evening. At this time, I will want to take a moment to review one board policy with non-substantive changes due to revising the liaison designation for homeless students to the district equity officer. This just changes the liaison person. As is stated in your board policies and superintendent's administrative procedures, the superintendent has the authority to change non-substantive features of the policies for the purpose of administrative clarity, and it is required to publicly notify the board of any such changes.
Thank you. Any questions in that regard from the board? Thank you for that notification. Any additional agenda items to be appropriately brought about by my fellow board members at this time? Okay. Seeing none, we'll open up with comments from board members. Mr. Allen?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Frazier?
Welcome, everyone.
Dr. Mowry?
Welcome to the meeting.
Ms. Spalding?
Nothing at this time.
Mr. Muhammad?
Happy New Year, everybody.
Ms. Fazy?
Welcome, everyone.
Ms. Hartman?
Welcome.
Welcome. That takes us to board honors. Dr. Fetcher?
Yes, for this board honor, I'm going to ask that Ms. Brown and Dr. Mallory, if you could join me at the lectern over here. Thank you.
It's ominous.
Okay, hardest part is done. This evening, I would like to recognize Mrs. Brown and Dr. Mallory for their dedicated service to Abington School District and communities of Abington Township and the Borough of Rockledge. This year, the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, or PSBA, Honor Roll program celebrates 40 years of recognizing long-term school leaders. With this anniversary comes some exciting updates to the program. Now, when school directors reach 5 years of service, for every 5 years thereafter, PSBA is pleased to offer them an Honor Roll certificate. This is PSBA's way of saying thank you to those individuals who exemplify leadership and statesmanship, giving unselfishly of their time and talents for the future of public schools, and giving back to their local communities through the guidance of the education of youth. So I have a certificate for each of you. That took a while to come out of the envelopes. I present it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seems like she gets it.
Yeah, congrats.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. It is an honor and a privilege to serve. Dr. Fetcher, does that conclude our honors for this evening?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. We can proceed with orientations, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I'm going to ask that Dr. Tony Butts, Director of Teaching and Learning, along with members of the Teaching and Learning Department and principals, to provide an orientation on student achievement data. Dr. Butts.
Good evening, Mrs. Brown, Dr. Fetcher, and the Board of School Directors. Tonight, we will review the 2023-2024 student achievement data. Tonight's presentation will highlight the school-wide plans and the various measurements of student learning that we use. We will also share the upcoming school year's goal plans. Highlights of last year's school-wide goal plans included the use of programs to help determine the strengths and needs of each student, implementing a new mathematics program at the elementary level, providing additional math instruction at the secondary level through an emphasis on mathematical concepts and a focus on spaced practice and error analysis, and providing routines to increase the opportunities for students to write at the middle school level with meaningful feedback provided on that student writing. This evening, we are also going to give to you and share with you different data that we use in monitoring student learning. These different data sets include diagnostic assessments, which are used to determine students' individual strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, and skills, and this data is also used to inform instruction. In addition to that type of data set, we also use benchmark assessments. Benchmarks are used to evaluate where students are in their learning progress and determine whether they are on track to performing well on future assessments that are based usually on end-of-year goals and expectations. At this time, Ms. Janine Sack will review our literacy assessment program and data.
Thank you, Dr. Butts. I share with you the information about Acadience Reading, a set of standardized formative assessments used to measure early literacy skills with students in kindergarten through 8th grade. The assessments are designed to identify students who may need additional instructional support and monitor their progress over time. The subtests represented on this slide included in Acadience Reading vary depending on the grade level of the student and are administered at different points throughout the school year. The Acadience assessment data shows that most students are progressing well in acquiring the necessary reading skills, with current gains aligning with historical trends. Notably, district performance on one subtest, phoneme segmentation, represented on the slide by PS, has seen a significant increase in proficiency since implementing Hegarty and ECRI routines, rising from the mid-70th percentiles to the high 80s. However, it is notable that disaggregated groups still show slower progress, and there is concern about maintaining the high performance in the above benchmark band, despite evidence of very strong growth in both the below and well below benchmark groups. Now, this slide represents the iReady diagnostic, which assesses a student performance against grade level and national norms, providing lexile and quantile data for reading and math. This helps set realistic growth goals and guides the selection of appropriate instructional tools to support student achievement. The 23-24 reading diagnostic results for K-5 shows overall progress from fall to spring, with 75% of students at or above grade level, consistent with previous years. It is important to note that the percentages represent the number of students who have met end-of-year targets. The increases from the beginning of year to the end of year was 34% for all students, with Black students increasing at 32%. Economically disadvantaged at 25% and students with IEPs at 23%, indicating varying levels of progress across different subgroups. Ms. Stokes will now talk about the PSSA assessment data and how we are going to address needs for the upcoming year.
Thank you and good evening. This slide shows the results from the ELA PSSA from the past 3 years. Looking at the 2023-2024 year, there are increases in achievement for grades 3 and 5. Grade 4 decreased by 1%. When looking across cohorts from grades 3 to 4, we see some growth in the percentage of students who scored proficient or advanced last year in comparison to the previous year. The performance of some disaggregated groups shows that greater progress is needed for all subgroups when compared to the all student group and the white student group. This upcoming school year, elementary schools will focus on specific action steps in our school improvement plans to positively impact student achievement. Outlined on this slide are some examples. 1, provide professional development in structured literacy with a particular focus on foundational literacy skills and knowledge building skills. Students will receive strategic instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension and fluency. 2, outline specific expectations for literacy instruction within the literacy block, such as explicit skill-based instruction or repeated practice. Students will engage in independent reading, guided reading, practice with decodable readers, and small group phonics instruction based on their specific needs. The literacy block will be an uninterrupted time for reading and writing instruction. Number 3, support utilization of ELA program look-fors during walkthroughs and observations. Administrators will use an observation checklist to provide teachers with clear, actionable, and timely feedback. 4, utilize formative assessment and student work analysis. These are opportunities for teachers to analyze student work and formatively assess student progress and performance to inform instructional design and plan for small group instruction. 5, create opportunities for peer-to-peer observation, build in time for collaboration. There will be opportunities for teachers to work together, to share their expertise in professional learning communities and during professional development and faculty meetings. 6, establish independent reading times and promote high-interest nonfiction text. For example, schools may designate specific times for students to read independently. 7, identify opportunities across the content areas for explicit vocabulary instruction and experiences with nonfiction reading and writing tasks. There will be an increased focus on nonfiction reading and writing and exposure to new vocabulary across the content areas. 8, develop self-efficacy among students by conferencing with students, promoting discourse, and using teacher-student and student-to-student feedback to foster greater engagement. The opportunities to practice literacy skills will be focused on empowering students to become critical thinkers as they express their thinking through discussion, collaboration, discourse, and writing. I now turn it over to Dr. Viola, Assistant Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning, who will now share some math data with you.
Good evening. This slide shows the results for the iReady Mathematics Diagnostic. Across each grade and within our disaggregated data, there are notable gains from fall to spring. Among our disaggregated groups, the largest gain was 43% for our Black students, while the lowest was 26% for our IEP students. It is important to note, again, as was said by Ms. Sack, that the fall and winter scores are expected to be lower as students still have several months of learning left to meet grade level standards. Each school takes a deeper dive into their data to determine which students need more support and in what standard area. Then they will focus on intervention strategies to support students in the core program, and if necessary, support students through more intensive instruction, such as through special ed or English language development. Dr. Jordan, principal of Willow Hill, will share the math PSSA data.
This slide shows the scores by grade for the 2024 Math PSSA. 60% of our students scored proficient or advanced, compared to 62% in 2023. Grade 3 increased by a percentage point. The greatest decline is seen in our grade 5 students, and there are concerns with regard to the performance of our disaggregated groups. As you know, we implemented a new math program this past year, which shifted instruction to a problem-based approach. Now, we did anticipate that the transition to our new math program would lead to a slight decline in scores as we adjusted to teaching and learning with a different pedagogy. The impact was greater in the upper grades, which makes sense based on the new progression of standards-aligned content and the lack of knowledge building from routines as students progressed from grade level to grade level. Regarding next steps for mathematics, in terms of professional development, year 1 focused on learning the new program, universal unit planning, and implementing the program with fidelity. This emphasis will continue this year. Year 2 will also focus on intense professional development that advances pedagogy and mathematical discourse by establishing goals to focus learning, promoting problem solving and advanced critical thinking, and providing opportunities for students to talk through mathematical approaches. We will also, administrators, provide teachers with intentional and strategic feedback with regard to the observation evaluation process, and provide teachers with feedback regarding the following areas. Number 1, classroom discourse. Teachers create space for students to talk with each other and listen to each other's ideas. 2, invitational routine. Teachers launch routines that require all students to engage in grade level content. Number 3, learning goals and pacing. The teacher is able to connect students' responses and ideas to the learning objectives. And number 4, math community and student positioning. The teacher is able to pose questions that will position each individual student as a valuable and critical contributor to the math community. We will also advance professional development by requiring opportunities for teachers to engage in reciprocal observations, and also building in the time for pre and post conferences so that students and teachers have time and space for synthesis, reflection, and planning. We will conduct teaching and learning gap analyses where we identify the content and skills to be mastered at each grade level, and then support students so that they have the skills and critical thinking capabilities necessary to advance their learning in the next grade level. And finally, we will continue to support small group instruction through opportunities for differentiated instruction, individualized support, and increasing opportunities for the teaching of mathematics vocabulary across all content areas through the use of vocabulary notebooks and journals, word walls, and graphic organizers, which promote multiple representations and will help to solidify understanding.
This slide shows the elementary results for the science PSSA over a 3-year comparison. The grade 4 performance on this year's data shows that 89% of our students were proficient or advanced. A notable success in this data, which is not necessarily shown on this slide, is that 55% of our students were advanced. We do have some concerns with the progress and performance of our disaggregated groups. And in terms of our next steps for science this year, we will have some district-wide initiatives that as we transition to the state's new science standards, which are called STEELS. STEELS stands for Science, Technology, and Engineering, Environmental Literacy, and Sustainability Standards. We are required to implement these standards by 2025. So in order to prepare, we are beginning professional development, and we are starting a superintendent's committee for science. And we will also review instructional materials that we may need to bring into our classrooms to prepare. And then finally, we are paying attention to the transition of the PSSA to grade 5 students. So we'll be working with our grade 5 students and teachers to make sure they're prepared, although this year is a pilot year for that test.
Thank you. At this time, I'm going to dismiss our elementary team. They will still be available for questions later, but we're going to allow them to take a little bit of a break as we bring forward our secondary team to present the information to you on our secondary student achievement data.
Good evening. At the secondary level, we administer benchmark testing 3 times a year to monitor student performance on grade level skills and content. Pictured on the screen is the student's overall performance in terms of predicted proficiency on end-of-year PSSA assessments. Predicted proficiency is calculated by Linkit, the creator of the benchmark, using students' historical performance on state assessments as compared to their benchmark achievement. Only students who took all 3 benchmark tests are included on the slide. There's a general improvement in proficiency across all grades, with notable gains from fall to winter and continuing through spring. Significant gaps continue to persist between subgroups, with Asian and white students consistently achieving higher proficiency rates compared to Black, Hispanic, and economically disadvantaged students. We also see that students with disabilities and English language learners show some improvement but remain the lowest performing subgroups, highlighting the need for targeted support to close these opportunity gaps. Okay. Students in grades 6 to 8 also complete the PSSA at the end of each year. At the middle school, the English language arts achievement data from the PSSA shows overall proficiency rates have declined slightly each of the last 3 years. As we saw with the benchmark data on the last slide, there are persistent and widening opportunity gaps among subgroups, indicating ongoing challenges in addressing their specific learning needs. The Abington Middle School continues to outperform the PA statewide results for each grade level. And now I'd like to ask Mr. File to come up to talk about our plan.
Thank you. So going into this year, we are going to refocus our school-wide energy on reading and writing. We're going to make sure that we devote significant amount of faculty meeting time, PLC time, department meetings to ensuring that teachers in all areas are comfortable supporting our students in reading. We're also excited that we're going to begin a vocabulary approach that's going to include all of our departments, all of our teachers, and we have planned 5 words per week that are going to be words of the week, and we're going to use them in all of our different classes in all of the special ways that that fit in those contexts. We are looking at conventions specifically. That was an area of need that emerged from the testing, so we are going to focus our efforts on that area for improvement specifically. And then in terms of reading levels, You may recall at the 2 meetings ago, just before the summer began, Dr. Fetcher mentioned the creation of a new reading class. So that is ready to go. Teachers, curriculum, students. So these are students who we did target who are reading below grade level to offer them additional support with our reading specialists. In addition to that, we are incorporating additional time in our 6th grade Pathways class that will focus specifically on reading strategies with reading specialists, pushing into those classes. And then finally, we are going to Lexile screen all of our students. So we have never done that before in my time in the building, and we're going to use that information in department meetings, team meetings. We're going to also use that through faculty meetings to figure out what we can do to target each kids to focus on growth for all of our students. One last item in terms of next step, which is not on the slide, is that we are implementing a co-teaching model. So in the past, there are some students who may not have been part of a regular education class. These are special education students, but they are going to be in our regular education classes supported with special educators. So that's something new that will begin in 6th grade next year, and we will move up the next 2 years to have all grades on board with that. I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Harkins, our math department chair.
Hello, everyone. Let's take a look at the benchmarks for last year. One thing to notice is I'm just going to go across the grade six row. I'll just take each row at a time, and you can see how the students performed in the spring compared to how they finished at the end of the year. Again, keep in mind that this exam is a test on what they're going to learn during the school year. So anticipate lower scores in the beginning and hopefully higher scores at the end. So taking a look at grade 6, you can notice that we moved from 25% in the fall to 53% in June. So an 28% increase. Grade 7 in the fall moved from 30 to 48%, an 18% increase. And a little bit of panic set in for us on algebra. We started in fall at 7%, but to tell you the truth, this is the first year that all of the 8th grade students took Algebra 1, and that keystone benchmark is very challenging to the students because there's algebra concepts in there they've never seen before. So you could see that showed up in that 7%. But the good news is we're able to move them 44 points by the time the end of the school year came about. Let's take a look at PSSA and Keystone. Again, I'm just going to go across the rows. I'll take a look at grade 6. You can see in grade 6, we went from, in 2022, 50 to 51 and to 51 this year. So we stayed pretty consistent in grade 6. And you notice the state results are 36.5, and we're about 15 points higher than the state average in grade 6. Grade 7 in 2022, we were 28%. 23, we moved to 43%, and last year able to get to 46%. So over that time, we have an 18-point gain. And again, comparing that to the state average, we're about 13 points higher than the state average. Grade 8, we started in 2022 with this file. We have 23% in 2022. We moved that to 41%, and then 42% last year. And the key factor for the grade 8 is this is the grade 8 PSSA. And we're not teaching a PSSA course anymore. We're teaching an algebra course. So when we teach the algebra course, we have to do a crosswalk between what are the PSSA math standards in grade 8, what are the Keystone standards in algebra, what are we missing, and how are we going to fill it in, and how are we going to make sure the students see that content. So it's good news to me that we're able to actually make some progress in a course that we really didn't teach. So whatever we did to fill in the gaps seemed to work for me. And then here's the algebra Keystone. I know it looks from 2022 to 2023, it goes from 70 to 78% and then to 49%. Just note that in 2022, that 70% represents our honors group in grade 8. In 2023, that 78% is also our honors group in grade 8. And just for reference, that 78% this year for honors is 85%. So we're able to move the honors group 7% last year. And then the 49% is all of our students in college prep on the Keystone exam. And what makes it okay of a score for me is because that's 15 points higher than the state average also. So upon average, comparing us to the state, we're on average about 15 points higher than the state. And now I'll turn it back to Dan Fowler, who will speak on our next steps in math.
So given those practices that have been successful, we're going to continue those. We're looking for ways to find additional time for teachers to collaborate and meet related to student progress and instruction. We also will continue and hopefully increasingly use data from our benchmarks, common assessments, and teacher planning to provide feedback, review, and reteaching where student performance warrants as the year progresses. Further, the math department's going to look to promote more student reflection and ownership of their learning to help increase engagement and the overall process of learning math. We're looking to have the students document their scores and use this for goal setting as they move through their courses. As I mentioned at the conclusion of the ELA slide, we are beginning co-teaching for the co-teaching model for grade 6 in mathematics as well. And that's also planned to continue through the grades over the next couple of years. Ms. Yanama is going to review an overview of the PSSA science scores.
Good evening. In the subject of science, students are tested at the middle school only in grade 8. The achievement data from the PSSA shows an overall proficiency of 58% last year. As we look at our subgroup data, we found the opportunity gap between general and special education students is showing a very promising improvement in science, with students with disabilities achieving a 5% increase in proficiency over last year. And this is now the narrowest gap among all the disciplines at the middle school for our students with IEPs, reflecting really meaningful progress in closing that divide. I'm going to ask Mr. Fowle back up to talk about what we're doing for science.
As Dr. Viola mentioned earlier in the presentation, the new science standards will be fully in place this year. We did know this was coming. We have been planning and working on curriculum prior to all of this. The eighth graders this year will be the first group to take the new assessment. So our emphasis with the teachers is just to be sure they're comfortable with the standards, that our curriculum is aligned, and that we have solid assessments and instruction planned to go along with them. As science is a subject that certainly lends itself to problem solving and hands-on activities, we're looking to increase our students' engagement and authentic learning opportunities, especially in light of the new standards. And then in grades 7 and 8, we aim to use the benchmark assessments to help inform our teachers areas of focus that may need revisiting from prior school years to be sure that the students have everything they need going into the spring assessment. Mr. Lodwick is back for high school data.
Thank you, Mr. Fowle. The ELA benchmarks indicate significant gains in literature proficiency for all students, with most notable improvements among Black students, who increased by 15 percentage points, and English language learners and students with disabilities, who increased 14 percentage points from fall to spring. The overall trend suggests a narrowing of opportunity gaps, particularly for traditionally underserved populations. The Literature Keystone results. Students completed the Literature Keystone at the end of their English 2 course in grade 10. In 2023 to 2024, we saw proficiency improve from 55% to 61%, marking a positive trend. We also saw a significant increase in students reaching the advanced level from 7% in 2023 to 19% in 2024, which is a 12% increase. Now, across subgroups, there was significant variability. Asian students' proficiency rates decreased by 4% from 71 to 67%, while Black students saw an 8% improvement from 42 to 50%, While both male and female students saw growth, female students in literature outperformed male students, with proficiency increasing by 6% from 60 to 66% compared to a smaller increase of 5% for males from 51 to 56%. Further, our students with disabilities continued to underperform, with proficiency rates decreasing by 9% from 30% in 2022-23 to 21% in 23-24, indicating a widening gap. Now, Dr. Swift will address our plans moving forward. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Good evening to the Board of Directors, Dr. Fetcher. Thank you. We have several action steps or next steps here. I'd like to focus on the first two to highlight the how, because we can read this all day and pull words off the page, but I'd like to expound on the first two. For bullet one, we talk about universal design for student learners. We're looking at opportunities to get in classrooms to see how we're supporting reading through print, audiobooks, text-to-speech, writing prompts, how we're grouping our students based on their interests and their strengths and their weaknesses, to also include opportunities for read-alouds. We look at culturally responsive teaching. We are talking about building relationships this year and trust and having safe, supportive climates. We will be looking at opportunities for educators to take into consideration in the building that student experiences and their identities also lean into this engagement conversation. When you say, well, what evidence are you talking about, Dr. Swift? Well, we will be tapping into the push-in support, focusing on ongoing data utilization, providing opportunities for reteaching, and looking at how we are pacing the curriculum. And our universal look-fors that we're focusing on through the Danielson framework on stage, domain 3, A, that speaks to communicating about purpose and content, and domain 3C, engaging all students in learning. And so I'm not redundant coming back because we're going to address conversation around biology and algebra. The platforms or venues of which these things will occur will happen in our professional learning communities, the departmental meetings, faculty meetings, the administrative council, opportunities for collaborative planning, vertical articulation with the middle school and high school this year, informal walkthroughs, and of course our formal observation process utilizing domains 1 through 3, pre-op, on, off stage, on stage 2 and 3, and we may teeter into domain 4 to follow up with our professional staff about what they're doing in the world that can also contribute back to the school. So I will not repeat that part of this conversation when I come back up. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the algebra Keystone exam. So in algebra, we begin by looking at benchmarks. So the benchmark, as you've been told before, gives us a nice viewpoint on where students are at different points in the year. And we use these to identify specific standards that we need to work on with students. So the algebra benchmark at the high school shows really a slower than predicted growth over time. As you can see, students in the spring were predicted a proficiency of 22%, and in the fall we're at 34%. That does not imply that students are going down or losing ground, but it does show that they're not growing at the speed that they should be over the course of the year. And that is resulting in widening opportunity gaps, especially for our most vulnerable subgroups at the high school, where we see students underperforming. Dr. Swift will share more about our action steps for mathematics, but we are putting in place additional math supports at the high school. And as we look at algebra, and I talk about the Keystone in a moment, as Mr. Harkins presented earlier, this year, in addition to our 9th graders taking algebra, all of our 8th graders took algebra. So algebra will look very different at the high school moving forward because students won't be taking algebra at the high school moving forward. Students will be entering in as 9th graders in Algebra 2. So it will look quite different moving forward. So as we look at the Keystone results at the senior high school, students typically take the Keystone after Algebra 1. And so that is usually about half of the 9th grade because, as Mr. Harkins had shared, historically, half of the students have taken the Algebra Keystone exam in 8th grade and half of them took it in 9th grade. This year, we had all 8th graders take it and still half of the 9th graders. When we look at these scores at the high school, it's not just that half of 9th grade, it's also going to be students in 10th and 11th grade who either retested or test for the first time because when they were in an algebra course, they possibly were exempt, which some of the students on this slide would have been exempt because they were sitting in algebra during the pandemic and they were exempt. And some of the students opted out during our virtual time when we had relatively high opt-out rates because, again, of the pandemic. So over the past few years, we've been trying to recoup that and get students to test if they hadn't tested originally. And so you'll notice in particular when you look at 2023 that the N count is particularly high. It's close to 1,000 students. And that is really due to over the last few years trying to get students to retest and to come back and make sure that even if you're not proficient at the end of your algebra course, you're proficient by the end of the time you leave our high school. And so as we look at the class of 2026, or the class of 2027, which is represented by this most recent testing group, when we combine the 24% that tested proficient this year with previous years, we're at 47% proficiency for that grade, which is actually a 12% increase from the class of 2026. So when we look at the last few years, we are seeing a very steady increase in the percent of students that are proficient by the time they graduate from the high school. And so I wanted to point that out because in particular, when you see scores reported in the fall on the Future Ready Index website at the high school level, those are reported by graduation classes, not by first-time testers. So Keystone results are presented very differently because the goal is to get students proficient by the time they graduate, not necessarily by a specific year in their schooling, if that makes sense. So we are seeing a positive trend, even though it may not look like it on this screen, again, with 47% of our class of 2027 proficient. Hi, Dr. Swift will talk a little bit more about math.
Thank you again, and to the same, focusing on the first two bullets for Universal Design for Learners, or UDL, opportunities through algebra. Administration would expect to see use of digital materials in the classroom, the sharing of content, offering choices to our students, and how they demonstrate their knowledge through read-alouds or conversations, perhaps around mathematical problems. The cultural responsive teaching component becomes reflective, hopefully empathetic and caring for students who do lack in some of the requisite skills or basic skills coming into math and into our building. More evidence that I will be looking for with the team and of course our supervisors coming through, push-in support, continuing that rigorous curriculum, our learning partnerships between central office here and the school, looking at the co-teaching opportunities that our students have and how they're faring in these core areas, and the use of manipulatives, and again, focusing on the basic skills, even down to multiplication tables and why students aren't able to get through algebra.
Ping-ponging a bit. And our last slide with data on it is about the biology Keystone exam. So you've been hearing a lot about changes in the science standards, and so we are expecting new tests next year in grade 5. It will be for the first time for PSSA at elementary level, and then the grade 8, and also the biology Keystone exam will be changing to reflect the steals next year in a pilot year. In 2024, biology did see a slight increase with 51% of our students being scoring proficient or advanced. As we look at the past few years, we noticed that the trends in our subgroups has actually been pretty stable and had some improvement. So most of our subgroups have been relatively level, with the exception of our Black students who saw a decrease of 2% last year.
And for biology, again, we talk about the universal design. For biology, we'll be looking for how students are able to provide examples for engagement, giving them specific learning goals and providing this opportunity in a flexible classroom. The cultural responsive teaching component, that focus on the contextual learning, research-based opportunities for our students through a rigorous curriculum, and then the development, hopefully, of higher level academic skills. But I do want to reemphasize to the board and to everyone listening that universal focus of the engaging students in learning, domain 3C, is what we will really be hammering in on when we come into those classrooms to see how well our teachers are faring there, and if they're struggling, to offer that support. That's why it's critical that we have the vertical articulation with our colleagues. Thank you so much.
Good evening. Last year's performance data have been reviewed and sampling of action steps highlighted. As such, I may emphasize some strategies you have already heard. I will share that after reviewing disaggregated data, every school has responded with goals and action steps to address the opportunity gaps that exist in Abington. In general, we know that good instruction is a benefit to every student. The schedule sets framework for daily operations, and care has been taken to create opportunities and access for students with identified needs. Using data to inform instruction, similar to the MTSS structure that is highlighted there, helps to tailor interventions, and there's also intention planned to emphasize enrichment as well. Culturally responsive and sustaining educator competencies equip educators in pursuit of providing educational equity with tools to do just that. And you repeatedly heard about universal design for learning. It increases flexible learning pathways to increase access to each student as a means to accommodate their learning differences. Given the information you have heard and more, the Abington School District continues to adjust to address the needs of our students. Thank you for your time.
So at this time, we are able to take any questions that you have for us.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Mics are open.
Yes, I have a couple of questions and a suggestion, if that's okay. Where are we here? For reading, are students required to maintain reading logs at home to reinforce the goal of discourse?
I'm going to ask Ms. Sack if she could approach the microphone and address the question regarding reading logs.
So this is not a required practice, but an invitation to read every night. The reading logs and the research behind reading logs suggests that is a time-intensive activity, and the results or the benefits may not get what you're looking for. But the reading every night is an invitation from all teachers.
Thank you. And also, is it possible the reading remedial class could also address science and math deficits?
I think when I mentioned the universal design for learning and how we take strategies and requisites that we have for one course to blend that into other core content. So I would say yes, at least for what we would like to try at Abington Senior High School this year. To your question, yes.
And then also my suggestion, to encourage discourse across the curriculum, students could be encouraged to keep math as well as science logs in order to make linguistic connections. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is part of what we see at our elementary, especially with mathematical discourse, but we really willingly take your suggestion as well for all of our grades.
Mics are open. Additional questions or comments?
I have a question/comment. So when you were going over the elementary data, Dr. Jordan mentioned sort of fostering this idea of math community. And I was kind of curious that I didn't hear that in connection to reading. I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
I believe when Dr. Jordan was referring to mathematical communities, it is a structure within our new illustrative math program in which students are really encouraged to learn as community or group members. So things like cooperative learning and things like working in small flexible groups, think, pair, share. So there's always these engagement opportunities, mathematical discourse opportunities to be a community of learners. And that's reinforced within the content area as well as within the structures that are used by the teachers. So I am going to ask Ms. Sack to come up and explain some of the ways in which we engage communities of learners within our reading classes when it comes to small group learning, think, pair, shares, and other ways in which we're using group-based learning or partnering of students in pulling together for learning. So the language may be a little bit different given the fact that we were referencing at that point in time the specific language used within the illustrative math program. But Ms. Sack, if you could talk to us about how we engage our learners as a community of learners in small group, flexible groups, and different types of group settings.
So in regards to some of the work that we do with our Journeys program, there's an invitation during the weekly stories for teachers to select scaffolded reading for the students to enhance their learning. One of our focus for our structured literacy professional development that we've mentioned before for this year is going to be on the development of oral language and the development of language structures. So to enhance what has been happening in the mathematics course. One of the things that the ELA teachers have noticed is the fact that the discourse has improved in their ELA's block from the experiences that they're seeing in the math course. During the small group instruction that occurs in the ELA block, there's also additional opportunities for teachers to do instruction to build community within the classroom. Students do repeated readings. They do think, pair, share, like Dr. Butts had mentioned. They also have an opportunity to share their knowledge about book projects, book reports, other ways to create that culture of literacy in their classroom.
I just also wanted to share a middle school specific example. In a recent meeting I had with our department chairs and supervisors, we were talking about plans for addressing goals and addressing some instructional topics. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that we need not make assumptions that middle schoolers know how to talk to each other and also address higher level, more critical questions. So we're going to need to remind our teachers and support them as needed to help the kids with whatever kind of prompting's needed to have those conversations. So I know that that is very much on our minds going into our time with teachers over the next couple of days in terms of instruction. But we're looking for ways to move off of devices and focus on each other.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that students learn best when they feel as though they're entitled to be part of the conversation, right? And so I was really struck, obviously, by that phrasing in the math curriculum, and wondered why there wasn't an explicit counterpart for the ELA curriculum, and it may not be part of whatever program we're currently using, but you don't necessarily need a preformed curriculum to foster and facilitate those kinds of engagements.
Absolutely. And, in addition to our work where we are looking at new programs that will be more explicit in that forming of community, I would be remiss in also sharing out some of the work that some of our librarians, as well as our teachers and our principals, bring forward in structuring communities of readers through their book chats, through their read alouds and through their one book, one school programs as well. But your point is well taken. You know, once they're fully engaged and they are part of the learning and they are the facilitators of their own learning, it strengthens that learning to the literacy. So
Yeah, I think we tend to do a good job with that at the grade school level. Ironically, students probably need it more in middle school and high school.
Agreed.
I'll if someone else wants to ask, I'll wait.
Has there been any conversation amongst the team in regards to what seems to be a steady trend line of declining proficiency in advanced scores from kindergarten through high school? That's across any of the subjects that have a test on an annual basis. Just what are your thoughts? What has been that conversation in regards to what's happening in the kindergarten class where you're seeing 90%, 80% proficiency in advanced scores, and then just this consistent decline over the years with our students?
You bring up a very good point, and this is a point that definitely concerns us because we do see a lot of students who have performed at high levels, and those high levels are not necessarily maintained as they move throughout the grades and their learnings. So I'm going to ask Dr. Viola to share some of the work that's been done and where we need to grow at the elementary level. And then I'm going to ask Ms. Anama to talk about some of the stretch learning opportunities and things that we're trying to push forward as well at the secondary level. Dr. Viola?
Yes, your question's a large one, so there are many ways I could answer. To give you an idea and a sense of what happens at our schools with their data analysis really is an ongoing process. So what you saw today was sort of the culmination of many, many hours of teams of teachers, administrators sitting and looking at data throughout the course of the year. But in terms of when we identify that there are some areas where we seem to be losing ground, we do take a deep dive into looking at who those students are, what is happening for them. You saw actual achievement data, but our school teams are looking at item analysis data as well to identify what it is, what are the skills and concepts that students need. For instance, we know that we lose some ground from kindergarten and first grade. And so we are strengthening how we approach our phonics and phonemic awareness. We're working closer with our first grade teachers. We have a team of reading specialists at our schools who are providing our professional development actually this week so that we can really identify the specifics of where we see need and prepare our teachers to approach that instructionally in the classroom, along with our MTSS program, which is identifying students who may have more intensive needs.
And much of what Dr. Royal has showed at the elementary level is happening at the secondary level. We have, particularly at the middle school, been leaning into WIN and this ability to differentiate instruction during that time with the support of extra reading specialists and math teachers who help support students. This year coming up, we've layered into that with, actually, we have additional faculty joining the middle school and the high school so that we can have these targeted reading classes, for instance, and also target supports in mathematics. We're looking at different models for special education with introducing co-teaching in several settings at the secondary level this year, and hoping that that will help narrow some of those opportunity gaps that we've been seeing with some of our subgroup populations. And then in terms of stretching students in the advanced level, we really did put some new efforts in this past year for our most advanced learners. And we saw some real benefits. As Mr. Ludwig shared, we saw a significant increase in the number of students who were advanced, for instance, on the English or the literature Keystone exam this year, which was very exciting for us. We do have teachers who are dedicated to enrichment, at the middle school, and they're dedicated to enriching all students, not just some students. And they work regularly with our teachers, push into win classes. They visit science classes and social studies classes and really look to develop very engaging application activities so students can really start to apply their learning. And so we really had an effort this past year to step up the rigor, and we saw some real benefits from that, and that will continue. We've also really looked through the MTSS model about how we are grouping students and being very flexible in that setting so that we can change groupings as needed based on, specific areas where we see where there's a standard area that students need extra support in, but also just universally students who are needing a little extra love in a subject or just overall. And so we have been really reimagining what the schedule looks like at both the middle school and the high school so that we can move around our resources and make sure we're getting them to where kids, to get to the kids who need them the most. And so I think we've made a lot of great strides over the last year, and it's exciting to see some of the things we were putting into place this upcoming year to really support our students who need help, but also all students who need to grow and continue to be enriched.
Thank you. I just want to point out, I'm looking at slide 9, where 84% of kindergartners are on or above grade level by spring of 2024. And, I'd be really interested to see what happens with those first graders, by the end of this year, right? Will 84% be at or above grade level again? Or what happens as they move through the grades? Because I've seen a similar trend line when it comes to engagement across the grades and how high engagement is in kindergarten. And as they move through the grades, engagement declines. And I wonder if they're related.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for the question. I know you're starting at the lowest of the most vulnerable, right? But I'm hearing root cause analysis through what you're asking. And words like reflective, what's empathetic, how we're looking at our students, their experiences, their identities, and student engagement, which I had documented while you were addressing us. That cultural responsive piece, where do we lose that? What happens when the children finally get to us, right? And then we had a very rich conversation at the grassroots level, and I would be remiss through our strategic planning process if I did not talk about our conversation with teaching and learning about curriculum alignment, the pacing guides, and the units, thematics that we may begin to look at and how we can structure the curriculum so the interest continues to grow and build. But overall, I think that student that's showing up and why they fall off, that we have a responsibility to lean in. And that's why I honed in on those 2 bullets regarding what was responsive, what universal design could mirror and align with all core, but then the platforms of which we look at the data and make decisions, instructional decisions, has to then bleed through everything that we do in the school. So thank you for the opportunity to answer.
Additional questions or comments?
I have a couple questions. First of all, thank you for the presentation, very thorough. I wanted to clarify the new reading course. I think Mr. File was the one who was talking about it. Is that only offered to our developing readers, or is that a course that's for all students, the new reading course at the middle school?
So we looked at our data for our most needy and struggling readers and just focused in on them for that class, just given that they were reading below grade level.
So are they then not able to take like another course or elective, or is there space in their schedule for that?
Oh, so that replaces an elective. So they still take the regular ELA class, but it would take the place of an elective.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a middle schooler, a kid who's going into 7th grade, and I find that his love for reading is definitely falling away as he gets older. And I heard Dr. Swift talking about seeing themselves in the instructional materials and that the identity piece there and the cultural responsiveness of the text that we're using. And I think I just need to say, like, making sure that kids are really have the opportunities to be reading and reading texts that they want to read, reading texts that are enjoyable, reading texts that are meaningful for them. Because I think sometimes we tend to move to novels that maybe kids have been reading for a million years that just aren't relevant to our students today. And I think that that's really important to make sure that we're looking at what the kids at the middle school are reading and that they're enjoying it. Because if we're giving them texts that aren't enjoyable to them, the buy-in isn't there. And kids get better at reading by reading. So how are we fostering that love of reading in our middle school? I think at the elementary school, I think kids just that's what we do, right? They read a lot. But at the middle school, I think that we see that fall away. And one of the ways to build it up is to have kids reading more, right? We heard a lot about how we're reaching our students through WIN and MTSS and through their core courses. But we didn't hear a ton about how students with disabilities are being, what their interventions are looking like, because that's a subgroup that we saw had probably the lowest percentages across the board and weren't making the increases that we would expect. So I know that we talked about co-teaching at the high school, which does that look like there's a learning support or special education teacher in the classroom with the regular education teacher at the same time?
It's for the middle school and the high school.
The middle school and the high school.
We're doing the same.
Okay, great.
But I think it's also critical too that we make sure we map out the accommodations for students with disabilities.
Yes.
As the foundational part, and then lift it from there, because there may be things that work for everyone universally, but if we then are targeting or that individual student, which aligns with the multi-tiered systems of support and not for discipline, but for educational purposes, that we have to make sure that that's in place for our teaching staff so that they have the tools necessary snapshot, if you will, for any student that has a disability with reading and mathematics.
Okay. I think that was it. Thank you.
One more question. I don't know if this is for Mr. Lodewick or Dr. Swift, but I noticed that the literature keystone, our students are performing below the state average. Why?
I can speak to last spring, right, in terms of observation. Engagement, are we really asking questions? We talk about the Danielson framework and the level of questioning that we're asking. How deep are we going into whether that student has grasped that concept, whether the teacher has taught that? I mentioned pacing. We had this conversation about where are two teachers on the continuum teaching the same class to different students. If I walk in one room, well, am I expected to see the same thing being taught? And then how is one teacher reaching a group of students and managing a class at the same time against another teacher? Not going to say I'm new to this, but I don't want to speak about Abington because I just showed up in terms of this last frame of the year, had an opportunity to get in and do 10 formal observations. And those were my wonderings and to seek that clarity. And so this is why we're here regarding the conversation about how we're looking at what we're doing, what is our problem of practice, why are students not able to test, what requisite skills do they have, and what do we need to bolster that and make them feel generally accepted and not ridiculed for not knowing a particular area of the content. But I think it is very important that we begin to collaborate in these areas so that we can foster this and get these scores up. But ultimately, it's the curriculum. It must be aligned and paced along with teachers that have lesson plans that are moving about, and that students with or without disabilities, all of them are accepted and wanted in the room and believe that they can master the material, but that we push them to do so. But I think that it stems from how far we're going into, as I shared with the Danielson Framework 3C, and that's that student engagement component.
So I appreciate that.
Yes,
but I'm going to challenge you a little bit.
Please do.
Are you suggesting that there are particular problems with the way literature is being taught in terms of pacing, given that this is, if I'm remembering correctly, the only test where students are performing below the state average?
I think to be fair, across the board, that we do need to look at the pacing of our curriculum, and who's teaching, and who's comfortable teaching a particular subject and what professional development support that they may need. But the evidence that we're able to see that the classroom is student-centered, is differentiated, and that we're able to not only pull from them for what we see that day, but they're able to demonstrate that mastery when that test is put in front of them. But that's more to come. But like I said, when I jumped in about the grassroots component, we had really great, rich conversations with our colleagues at the school. And we want to bring this forward through our strategic plan, but it just not be words, but it's a living document that then is demonstrated when we come to you and share this data with you annually. So thank you for the question. Did you want to add anything else about it, the curriculum?
I just wanted to say the answer to your question is very complex. Like, why is it happening? There are a lot of answers that I could give to that, but I think the more I thought about the way the senior high school is teaching English, we have to get back to the way we used to teach it, where it was engaging, where students were talking about the literature, they were seeing themselves in the literature. We made great strides in trying to adopt culturally responsive works for both the middle and the high school over the last couple of years. We've done a really good job of adding titles, adding short stories, adding nonfiction where the kids can see themselves. I think it boils down to engagement. And I think when I walk into the classrooms now, I don't see the same energy that I used to see when I would walk in. And I think it's just a matter of getting people to move on from the pandemic and stop and just realize that the kids want to be engaged in the literature. They want to read novels. They want to read choice novels.
And poetry.
And poetry
Don't
and
forget the
drama
poetry.
and everything that goes along with having a great English class. And I think if we think about it, most kids remember their English classes from high school based on the fact that their teacher was excited about about what they're doing. And I think while the teachers at the high school have worked very, very hard, I think the other piece is the fact that since we moved to a 9 and 10, since we moved ninth grade to the high school, that's been a big help because now the students it's like a cohesive team now where all of high school is together. And I've noticed the way those two grades have been working together the last few years. We're reinstituting things that we did pre-COVID, and I think it's working. And I think the bottom line is engagement, and the bottom line is making kids like what they're doing and want to come to that class.
It always is.
I know, and English is one of those subjects where you have to talk about it. You have to teach critical thinking, and I think that's going to be the major focus. I know with my middle school teachers this year is going to be, I'm going to focus on having Socratic seminars and having discussions and having the kids, read things that they want to read and talk about things that they want to read, and that there's no right answer if you can prove from the literature what you're backing up. And we've gotten away from that, I think, a little bit. And so if that's an answer, that's pretty much the way I'm thinking.
I mean, that's about the best answer I could think of.
This is how I would say this if you and I were just talking.
Correct. That's perfect.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Can I just ask you a follow-up question from that one? The biology and the algebra keystones are very content specific.
Yes.
But the literature keystone is more of a skill-based assessment.
The PSSA is very skill-based. I would say that and I always said this, I like the Keystone exam much better than the PSSA, because we used to have the PSSA in 11th grade. And it really didn't teach what we were supposed to be teaching in English. It's like we want the kids to critically think about things that they haven't read before. They're reading something and they have to react to it. And so I think, yes, it is skill-based, and yes, it's based on the standards, but we also have to get the kids to be able to, when they're asked to read something they've never read before, react to it, interpret it without help. And I think that's where we're really going to put most of our effort in, definitely into the middle school this year. I'm going to ask the teachers to allow the kids to kind of run with it. I think they've been kind of giving them the answers a lot of times when they're asked, like, what's the theme and what's the author's purpose. And the kids need to be able to do that on their own. And I think that's really the key to teaching English, is to allow the kids to be creative and like you said, see yourself in the literature. They have lost the love of literature. I mean, I know that. And I think a lot of the teachers have too. So I want to get that back. So.
My point is, though, that unlike the algebra and the biology, we can start at the middle school at 6th grade, even earlier in the elementary schools, building those skills for that assessment.
And that's really the purpose of why we got Study Sync. Study Sync is a very good program if it's used correctly and if it's used for the skill portion of what you're teaching. There also has to be another component where students are allowed to read novels and they're allowed to talk about novels and just love what they're reading. So I think I loved the Study Sync program because it does teach all of those skills and it does follow the state standards. And if you teach it with fidelity and get through it, and every single standard is covered by the end of each of the years. So they are getting those skills, but they also have to know how to use that skill and apply it to something they've never seen before. So I think that's where a little bit of the disconnect has been. But again, we've only had the program for 2 years. So we're still working through how to do it exactly right. And you're always going to expect a drop when you're implementing a new program. So it usually takes about 3 years to see the results. I'm obviously praying that we'll see those results next year, but yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from the board?
I would just
Go ahead.
like to say I do appreciate the comprehensive approach. There's not just one person spitting out data. It truly is the entire instructional leadership. And I think that gives great comfort to the community, knowing that it's not just one person responsible. There's a solid team. And you all spoke so eloquently. And I think Dr. Varela said, like, what we see up here is the culmination of countless meetings. So that came through, and I genuinely appreciate that. And also how engagement seemed to be threaded within this, especially based off of 2 weeks, our last meeting's presentation around engagement. So I thank you for putting this together. Very impressive.
Any additional questions or comments from the board? I just wanted to make an observation that was stated before about the Keystone assessments being taken at the 8th grade level and the 9th grade level. And the reason why I want to pause there is because that was a board vote to have all students take Algebra 1 in their 8th grade year. And to have students, I think we said 50% of our students were taking the Keystone at 9th grade and 100% of our 8th graders are taking it at 8th grade. We can compare apples to apples. So can you take a moment to share between those two cohorts, how are our students who are taking Algebra 1 in their 8th grade year faring compared to the students who were able to take the Keystone at a later grade?
Sure. So, sorry, I just need to look at the numbers real quick. Again, like when we look at how we report to the state, it's by graduation class. And so the students in 9th grade, so as we look at that cohort of students who are 9th grade, some who took the test in 8th and some who took it in 9th, were at 47% proficient. For the class that stood in eighth grade right now, we're at 48% proficient.
Okay.
So they're 1% higher than the ninth grade cohort, but knowing that the ninth grade cohort took it over 2 years. Is that the comparison you're looking for?
It is. I know there was some wariness about, one, there being 2 big tests in 1 year, and 2, with the bar being raised high, will our students be able to reach that bar? And I think the data shows that we are on the right track, and our students can reach the bar when we set higher standards and provide the support for students to reach it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. My next question has to do with opportunities outside of the traditional classroom for basic skills and critical thinking. For example, do we play 24 math in our elementary schools and in our middle schools? Have we considered clubs like Engineer Society? There's a NSBE conference that goes on every year that target that if we see that there's an opportunity gap, especially in our middle school and our high school related to mathematics, have we considered these things to boost interest and to tell students that you do belong in these spaces and your scores should be aligned with the other subgroups, as we saw in kindergarten with the iReady diagnostic? There's less of a gap there if you take out our students with disabilities, and then we continue to see it drop. So when we go into looking at those targeted areas, can you speak to what's happening like outside of the classroom through gaming, club, competition, competitive creativity, through engineering groups?
Would you want to speak to that, Mr. Harkins? I mean, I can, but I feel like you have a really good, some of it I'll tell you also is happening in WIN. So Mr. Harkins can speak to this. Like, we also incorporate a lot of that gameplay concept into the WIN as one of the station rotations. So that's also something.
So we do have a coding club. We do have a chess club. We do have an opportunity now with the longer periods and win time. We do have Sudokus. We have kids play Sudokus. We play 24 game. We do a lot of strategy type games when we have an opportunity during WIN. I had another thought. Let me think about it. We do. So we have our math contest. That's what I want to say. So we have the Atlantic Pacific Math Contest. So we run. We're still involved in the Pennsylvania Math League. We're still involved in math counts. So as a math department, we really do try to incorporate those types of games and challenges to get students to think a little bit differently outside of an algebraic kind of approach. So that's what we do at the middle school in mathematics.
Thank you. And the last thing I wanted to emphasize before we take a moment's break for people to use the restroom is that emphasizing student engagement. I have a star around that. I enjoy the amount of times that I've heard it mentioned. Research supports that when students are able to learn and then teach others what they know in their own voice, that they own it, right? That's why the jigsaw approach yields the highest result. If you can look it up, because people need to go to the bathroom. But I want to thank you for not just presenting the data, but also saying what we're going to do about it. And I also look forward to hearing more about the building plans, because in those building plans, it really talks about the goals for closing the achievement gap for the different sub areas. So thank you for your time. We will take a 3-minute break. Thank you. We appreciate you. Okay. Thank you so much for your patience. We are going to continue with agenda item number 6. 4. I'm sorry.
She skipped 4.1.
4.1. Thank you. Which is comments from citizens. Comments from citizens are being conducted both in person and by phone. The phone number to participate in public comments is 267-715-3717 and is featured on the screen at this time. You can call in on your landline or mobile phone. If you are within the room, there are mics to the left and to the right of you. Please be sure to state your name and address. Mr. Sneed, I look to your guidance for how long we need to wait for the phone lines, please.
40 seconds.
Thank you.
We do have a citizen for public comment. Next citizen for public comment is phone number ending in 8717. Please state your full name and address.
Can I go? Thank you very much. If there are no speakers within the room, we can move forward with agenda item number 6. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation to approve the personnel addendum?
Yes. One moment. Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the changes in personnel as reflected in personnel addendas numbers 6.1 and number 6.1A.
Second. We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Personnel addenda begins with a request for leaves of absence for 2 professional employees, the appointment of 8 professional staff members, and the rehire of 1 current long-term substitute for the 2024-25 school year. Personnel addendum continues with compensation for speech and language evaluations, curriculum leaders, and support and auxiliary staff items.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Golden?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Daisy?
Aye.
Mrs. Hartman? Aye. Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for approval of the financial reports?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the financial reports for the period ending June 30th, 2024 and July 31st, 2024, as reflected in addendums number 7.1 and 7.1A.
Do I have a second? We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I'm going to ask Mr. O'Neill if you could please summarize the June and July 2024 financial reports.
Thank you, Dr. Fetcher. Financial Reports Board meeting comments for the periods June 30, 2024 and July 31st, 2024. With regard to revenue, as of June 30, we received $179.7 million, which is 100.01% of the $178.1 million revenue budget. As of June 2023, we had collected $166.8 million, which was 99.8% of budgeted revenue. Year to date, we are $12.9 million ahead of last year, which is due to several factors such as greater than anticipated interest earnings, earned income taxes, access funds, and greater basic education and special education state funds. Regarding expenses, year to date, we expended $184.5 million of our $189.9 million budget, which equates to 97.1%. For the same time period last year, $171.9 million was expended, which was 95% of the then $180.9 million budget. The 2023-24 food service report has a cumulative profit of $113,930 for the year, which exceeds the $85,000 contract guarantee. The July financial report indicates that the district received $9.6 million in revenue, of which $8.3 million is real estate taxes. The district spent $3.7 million during the first month of the 2024-2025 budget year. This concludes both reports on both months' income statements.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? I do have a question about 7.1, line item 2, the 2000 expenditure column and the support services. Can you just give a little bit of information about the $1,909,855 that's in parentheses there?
Mr. Vittoria, you.
So the 2000 support services that's a 2% difference than the budget in the 2000s there. That is areas such as guidance, psych service, transportation, student services, facilities, administration, business services, and technology. And captured in that 2,000 was the $1.4 million subsidy payment for the MCIU transportation that was deducted. It also includes things such as utilities that were higher than expected.
Okay, I do remember that 1.4. Okay.
And that overage is going to be covered with the budget transfers in Agenda 13.1.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Muhammad?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for approval of the payment of bills?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the payment of bills for the period ending June 30th, 2024 and July 31st, 2024, as reflected in addendums number 8.1 and 8.1A.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I can answer any questions you may have regarding the payment of bills.
Questions or comments for payments of bills? Ms. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Muhammad?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. I'm sorry. No. It's been passed. I'm sorry. I have a question, but Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for permits for the use of buildings and grounds?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the applications for permits for use of buildings and grounds as reflected in addendum number 9.1. All permits are subject to change per the provisions of the health and safety plan pertaining to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
It's been second. Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. The permit addendum reflects typical requests for buildings and grounds for meetings and other school events and activities for this time of year.
Questions or comments from the board? Again, thank you to our community members, our staff, our families who devote their time to create spaces such as some of the items that are here for our students to engage and feel a sense of belonging. Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Muhammad?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for awards of contracts?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the awards of contracts as reflected in addendum number 10.1.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. This is for a retroactive award of contract due to safety issue for fire hydrant replacement at Abington Senior High School.
Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Muhammad?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for Title I school-wide plans?
Yes, in accordance with the requirements of the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, the administration recommends that the Board of School Directors approve the 2024-2025 Title I school-wide plans as attached, as well as future amendments for Highland School, Overlook School, Roslyn School, and Willow Hill School, and authorize the superintendent or designee to submit such plans to the Pennsylvania Department of Education in the manner prescribed by the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. To address the required components prescribed by Pennsylvania Department of Education and Every Student Succeeds Act, each of our 4 Title I schools develop a Title I school-wide plan through a building level steering committee that conducted a thorough review of the essential practices to advance educational programs and processes to improve student achievement. The administration recommends that the Title I school-wide plans be approved for the 2024-2025 school year. That being said, this is a requirement for Title I. We are also completing school improvement plans in every school, even though it is not a requirement. And those plans will all be posted. I'm going to ask Ms. Artur if she could take a moment and just show where these items are housed on our website so that the public can view the plans as well as any questions that may come from the plans themselves.
Sure. So if you go to the Abington School District website, under the departments, if you go to Teaching and Learning, there's a link on the Teaching and Learning Department page for the school-wide plan, and they're all available here. Alternatively, you can go to the websites of each school building. If you go to their About page, there is also a link to the school plans via the school websites as well.
Okay. And we will update those as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're completing some things and the principals are here looking and saying we may need like a little bit more time, but we're going to update those as soon as they're complete.
Understood. Questions or comments from the board? I mentioned before that I do appreciate the language that's being used in the plan that is specific. For example, if we continue to look at data and we see that there are certain groups that are performing lower than other groups, some of these plans use that wording that we are going to address the achievement gap or the opportunity gap as it pertains to students with IEPs by doing this, as it pertains to Black students by doing this. So I like that we are being very specific so that we can measure how the interventions that are put in place are working, the impact of those interventions. So I thank you for that specific language, and I look forward to seeing those goals get achieved over time.
And to also speak about that, I think that what you will see specifically this year, and if you look at last year's plan and compare it to this year, although that data has been analyzed and part of our plans in the past, we are making a very intentional effort to be specific in our plans to address demographic data as well as subgroups and to continue to plan for it, but upfront be intentional about it.
I appreciate that. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Ms. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for Title I and Title II equitable services?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors authorize the administration to execute an agreement with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit for a 3-year agreement for the 2024-25, 2025-26, and 2026 through 27 school years to provide mandated title services to eligible students and professional development for staff in qualifying non-public schools.
Second.
We have a second. Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. In conjunction with receiving Titles I, IIA, and III funds, we are required to provide services to qualifying Abington School District school-age residents who attend non-public schools and professional development for staff working in non-public schools located within the geographic boundaries of the Abington School District. And these services would be provided by the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
Can I just ask a quick question? So these services and trainings are being funded through the federal government. So we get money from them and then we
Yes.
provide, okay. I just wanted to clarify that. So it's not, for instance, from school tax?
Correct.
Okay.
Dr. Butts, do you want to expand on that at all?
Yes, these are the federal program grant funds, and this comes from the United States Department of Education, obviously, through congressional actions, and it is then allocated to states then allocate it to local educational agencies, and as part of that grant requirement, we also receive funds of which we service students that are also in non-public schools.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Feasy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman? Aye. Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for budget transfers?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the transfers within the district's 2023-2024 budget as reflected in addendum number 13.1 and authorize the administration to present transfers in the future when required.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I'm going to ask that Mr. Vittoria, if you could please review the budget transfers.
So the State Auditor General and School Code require budget transfers. We have budget transfers for the 23-24 school year in the amount of $5,937,842, which is 3.13% of the budget. It is anticipated that budget transfers for the 23-24 school year will be presented, if needed, again in November or December of 2024 to coincide with the completion of the school district's annual financial audit.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
What's the purpose of the budget transfers?
So the budget transfers are to cover overages in functions and objects.
And is that taken from the fund balance?
No, it's just moved within the budget.
So it doesn't exceed the overall budget amount, but within the subcategories of where we take a budget and we say we think that this is going to be this much within the 2400s or the 2500s. The overall amount remains the same, but we're inter-fund transferring.
Reallocating.
Yep.
Thank you.
Within the same category. Yeah. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Feasy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman? Aye. Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for district-initiated assessment appeals?
Yes, that the Board of School Directors ratify the assessment appeals filed on the district's behalf in accordance with the list provided to the board.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Keeping in mind the confidentiality of litigation matters, Mr. O'Donoghue is here this evening and can answer any questions that you may have.
Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Feasy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman? Aye. Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for an MOU with Montgomery County Community College?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors authorize the administration to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Montgomery County Community College to offer the Gateway to College program.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. The Teaching and Learning Department, in collaboration with Abington Senior High School Administration, are recommending the approval of a memorandum of understanding with Montgomery County Community College. The Gateway to College program at the Montgomery County Community College serves young people who are at risk of not completing high school or who have stopped attending school. This program gives students the opportunity to earn a high school diploma while transitioning to a college campus and earning college credits.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
I did have one question about the per semester tuition that's noted here. Is that cost on the family, on the district?
The cost for the tuition, which is also inclusive of textbooks and materials and all the programs associated with this particular program, which is, works with students who are at risk, is paid for by the school district.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? What age are we talking about here?
Students are 16 through 21.
Thank you so much. Any additional questions or comments?
And this, students who would utilize this program would be using this program in addition to leaving the school district for a private placement potentially?
This program would be their schooling. They're not leaving and doing them together.
But I mean, instead of an alternative placement
Right.
at a different school, they would be able to attend this program at a much lower cost.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
That's okay. It's late.
Any additional questions or comments? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendation for the confidential student matter?
Yes, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approves the confidential student matter as reflected in addendum number 16-1.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. This confidential student matter is regarding an educational service agreement. Keeping in mind confidentiality of student matters, I can answer questions you may have.
Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Frazier, can you please read the recommendations regarding board policies and agenda items 17.1 and 17.2?
Yes, passage of the board policy entitled Discrimination/Title IX Sexual Harassment Affecting Students is required of the law. Therefore, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve in reading the revisions to the board policy entitled Discrimination/Title IX Sexual Harassment Affecting Students as attached in addendum number 17.1.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Annually, there's a review of district policies and superintendent's administrative procedures, and that occurs under the direction of the Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Melchor, in conjunction with feedback from our solicitor's office. Two policies are being presented this evening for approval of revision. The policies are being presented for approval in one reading as they only have non-substantive changes. Dr. Melchor? Legal reason, right. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fetcher. Both of these policies relate to changes in Title IX regulations. Back on April 19th, the U.S. Department of Education released the final 2024 Title IX regulations, and those updates went into effect on August 1st. So the Solicitor's Office reviewed our related policies and SAPs regarding Title IX, and these recommendations reflect their feedback.
Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Mr. Allen?
Aye.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Ms. Spalding?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Dr. Fetcher, any additional reports for this evening?
Yes, Ms. Brown, I provide for you the conference attendance and professional leaves for your information.
Thank you. Any business to be brought about from my fellow board members? Okay, that takes us to agenda item number 20, which is comments from citizens. Comments from citizens are being conducted both live and by phone. If you would like to call in for public comment, the phone number is 267-715-3717 and is featured on the screen. If you are within the room, there are mics to the left and to the right of you. Please be sure to state your name and address. Mr. Sneed, how are we on time?
30 seconds.
Thank you.
And we have nobody on the line.
Thank you. And seeing no speakers within the room, we'll close out with comments from my fellow board members. Mr. Allen?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Frazier?
Have a good evening.
Dr. Mowry?
I'm going to say something a little longer.
That's
Sorry.
okay.
So I'm in thinking about the presentation tonight, as I'm working on my own syllabi for the semester that starts next week. I want to encourage our teachers in particular to recall why they love teaching what they teach. For me, it's always an important part of getting back into the semester, because I know that if I'm not cognizant of that, if I don't communicate that to my students, it makes the invitation to become part of the intellectual community that I belong to a much heavier lift. It's sort of where everything starts and everything begins. So especially for our ELA teachers who are really leaning into making a difference to the data, we're seeing it's not all hard work. It should be joy too. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Muhammad? I'm sorry, Ms. Spalding. Ms. Spalding.
No.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Mr. Muhammad?
Good night, everyone.
Ms. Fazy?
Have a great night.
Ms. Hartman?
I just want to wish all the teachers that are returning tomorrow best of luck for a great school year, and the students who come next week to have a great school year.
Dr. Fetcher?
I'm going to echo that a bit. I just want to say I'm excited tomorrow if our teaching staff, our paraprofessionals who are out there watching this meeting tonight intently right before tomorrow. I'm excited to see you tomorrow and to kick off the school year. And I think we have a lot of exciting things going on this year in Abington School District. And I remain proud to lead Abington School District. And I thank all of the individuals tonight who have been here dedicated to this very important topic of student achievement, and something that, you know, falls within our mission and vision here at Abington School District to ensure that all of our students can achieve and that they have the correct foundation to be able to reach that achievement and the correct environment. Thank you.
Excellent. As a fellow educator, welcome back to all of the teachers. Thank you for the admin who worked book studies and how you're going to lead your buildings. We appreciate you for all your hard work. Let's go. This meeting is adjourned.